Greetings, friends, family, enemies, and total strangers of all kinds. Welcome back to the Extra Milestone, your weekly/bi-weekly Cinemaholics spin-off series where we go back in time to discuss, off to a great start, the classic films that made the cinematic landscape what it is today. I'm your host, as always, Sam Noland, and with me I have a long-awaited guest on the Cinemaholics Extra Milestone. It is, at last, the one, the only, Mr. Adonis Gonzalez. Adonis, how are you?
Hello. I'm doing just fine, Sam.
Good.
Just enjoying my time here in the middle of this burning hellscape that I call home.
Yeah, it's the summer right now, and you would not be able to convince anyone otherwise. It's incredibly hot right now. Honestly, I'm a summer child myself. I don't know about you, but it's my favorite season by far. So it's a small price to pay for.
Oh, I love the summer. I love everything that comes with it. You know, going to the lake, ice cream,
the one lake
cool
that you have
water
in your vicinity that hasn't evaporated from the heat.
Yeah, it's more of a skate park at this point.
There are like corpses at the bottom of the lake that from unsolved mysteries from years ago. This episode went to a really dark place. Let's sidle away from this, and let's talk about the fact that this is the Extra Milestone. Now, I want to let's just. It's the elephant in the room. I had announced that you were going to be my first guest on the Extra Milestone, and in fact, that did not work out because Adonis is a good, hardworking, honest, and in complete understanding of his priorities, good soul. So for all those reasons, it just could not work out that Adonis was the first guest. We don't actually know when this one is going to come out, but presumably sometime in the next month. But Adonis, you're here at last. How does it feel to be on the Extra Milestone for the first official time?
Oh, it feels great. It honestly feels really good to be podcasting again.
Yep.
Especially recently, I've had a resurgence in watching movies. For a while, I stuck to television. You know, streaming kind of got a hold of me.
Sure.
Watched perhaps a little too much of The Good Place. I think I binged 3 seasons worth in a matter of 3 days.
Oh my goodness!
I don't think that is what's
mathematically possible.
Mathematically possible or recommended.
Yeah.
9 out of 10 doctors would actually disagree with my habits, but like I said, I'm really glad to be here. Glad to be talking about movies again with one of my favorite person to talk about movies with. It's a dream come true.
Well, that's very nice of you to say. I want to say real fast that there is no such thing as too much of The Good Place, but I think I could see what you're saying. That does seem like a lot, but I'm glad that you're back in a movie watching mood, and that's a good thing because Adonis, we got some movies to talk about today. 3 of them, in fact. This is going to be our first, at least the first one that I've done, our first triple feature on the Extra Milestone. So just to give a little preview, we're going to be talking about John Ford's The Grapes of Wrath. We're going to be talking about Ishirō Honda's Terror of MechaGodzilla, which I'm very excited about. And finally, Dreamworks' How to Train Your Dragon. We're bending our rules a little bit. We usually stick to the 20th century when it comes to the Extra Milestone. But because this is a little bit more of a free-flowing show, and plus I think we both have somewhat of a personal connection with this movie in particular, I think it's okay to bend the rules, and I anticipate that we'll be doing that more down the line. But for now, Adonis, what do you say we get going on our A feature, so to speak?
Let's do it.
Yeah, so it is John Ford's The Grapes of Wrath.
Sweeping across the country comes one of the great literary achievements of our time. A human, revealing, soul-stirring story that instantly becomes the most discussed novel of modern literature, The Grapes of Wrath.
The Grapes of Wrath, please. I'll have to put you on the waiting list. We've never had such a demand for a book. Do you have a copy of Grapes of Wrath?
Sorry, we're all sold out.
Yes, The Grapes of Wrath. Well, send me as many copies as you can. I can't supply the demand.
The Grapes of Wrath.
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 Grapes of Wrath.
Grapes of Wrath. As sales skyrocket The Grapes of Wrath becomes the book of the nation. Everyone, everywhere, joins in the discussion of its vital problems. Due to this unprecedented popularity, producers vie for the motion picture rights. And finally, 20th Century Fox announces the purchase of the book and plans for its immediate production. A storm of discussion arouses the nation.
It is, of course, based on John Steinbeck's novel. And Adonis, I want to ask you right on the bat, two questions. First off, have you read the novel? And secondly, because I know you've seen the movie, what's your relationship with the movie itself?
Oh, okay. Well, to answer your first question, I have not read the novel, but I really want to pick it up and read it.
Yeah.
I can't remember if it was ever an option in my school to read it. It was an option to watch the movie, and we did. And I'll get into that when I answer your second question. But I don't think I ever really. I'm sure I own the book. Yeah. The Grapes of Wrath is kind of just one of those books, like the Bible or all of the Harry Potter novels that you kind of just see show up in people's houses. You know,
you sort through enough attics, you're bound to find a copy of the Grapes of Wrath and the Christian Bible, apparently. So that's good to know.
But you'll never find out who bought it. Like, you could ask everyone in your family and they'll just go, oh, that's always been there. Yeah. Well, Grandma, it can't have always been here.
It just sort of materialized out of thin air, fittingly enough. Yes.
Yeah. And to answer your second question, I did watch The Grapes of Wrath when I was younger.
Well, of course. You couldn't have watched it when you were older, could you?
Touche. But much like everyone else, as a school project, and it was interesting rewatching it just for the fun of it, because you get told to watch something to write a 200 or so word essay on it, and you're just like, oh wow, okay, well, I already hate this movie for making me do all of this work. But even seeing it the first time, I really loved The Grapes of Wrath. It's such a, I mean, it's not like it's a big plot twisty kind of movie, which admittedly is my kind of thing. It's very straightforward. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end, and relatively you can see it getting to every place that it gets to fairly easily. There's no huge twists and turns besides, I guess the lack of rising up to the expectations that the characters are expecting. But I still really, really enjoyed it. When I saw it the first time, I enjoyed it when I watched it again. And it's definitely one of my favorite movies of all time.
Nice.
And I think a lot of people would agree with that it's a really good movie.
That's great to hear. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that. But first, just to clarify, something that has actually come up on previous episodes of the Extra Milestone. We are going to be a little loosey-goosey with spoilers, but I think with these three movies in particular, they're not really twist-based. I think it's fair to say that the Grapes of Wrath is kind of one of those movies where, like, I think it's fair to say you could hear the whole plot and still, like, not really understand how the story plays out. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not a movie that is based on the incidents taking place within. But of course, by all means, if you'd rather have seen it beforehand, we are going to be talking about all these movies somewhat at length. So keep that in mind as we continue. Secondly, The Grapes of Wrath is interesting because it's one of... It was released in 1940, I should say. March of 1940 is when it premiered wide, and that is the celebration that we're doing for this month. All these movies are March releases. But it doesn't really come up that often on, like, best of the 40s lists. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's sort of the holy trinity of Citizen Kane, Casablanca, and It's a Wonderful Life, which admittedly all phenomenal movies. I want to make no reservations about any of that. But a lot of the times it stops there. But now part of that is just because it's like, it's older and doesn't get as many eyeballs on it. But also, it's kind of an unassuming movie when you think about it. Like, it doesn't have some great, big, huge, like, innovation. There's no particularly notable, like, quotes or anything from it. It was nominated for several Oscars and indeed won a couple of them. But it just doesn't come up as often, which I think is a damn shame, because I'm in full agreement. This is a utterly fantastic movie. I first saw it in the summer of 2017, so 3 years ago now. And I watched it like not more than a couple days after having a very dramatic dental appointment in which I got all 4 of my wisdom teeth removed. And for whatever reason, I was laid up on the couch and decided, what better time than now to throw on The Grapes of Wrath? Because I'd never seen it before, and it was available on some streaming service or whatever. I thought, why not? Let's do it. And I vaguely remember falling asleep in the middle of it and having to pick it up later. But that was no slight on the movie, as it turns out, because as I rewatched it several weeks ago now for this episode, I was reminded, oh, so it's fantastic. I'd forgotten about that. And to clear it up, I read the novel a long time ago. I want to say freshman year of high school. So I remember very little, but I do remember liking it very much. It's the rare, we all have a few of them. It's the rare like school project book or movie that actually made an impression as being like artistically awesome. I remember specifically, I saw 12 Angry Men in a government class one time and thought, oh, this is going to be just the most tedious nonsense ever. And lo and behold, it's actually one of the greatest movies of all time. So that worked out nicely, wouldn't you say? And yeah, The Grapes of Wrath was very much the same. We did not actually watch the movie, which was unusual. That was always sort of the reward, wasn't it? Like, we read the book and then for like as a reward for getting through the book, which is kind of condescending, come to think of it. But you'd get to watch the movie in class. That was always something to look forward to. And yeah, right. Rewatching it, I was just sort of really taken by the storytelling. It's John Ford really has a knack with creating a world in which like the characters within it, the main characters at least, you really get wrapped up into them because they're so heavily fixated on it and they're so meaningfully explored, each and every one of them, or well, not necessarily every one of them, but the ones that matter, they're really given a lot of dimension, which is impressive considering just how often John Ford worked. He would crank out like 2 to 3 movies a year. I believe, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but John Ford, by the time he died, had directed somewhere in the ballpark of 125 movies.
Wow.
Which is ludicrous to think about. And it was a different time, so they were just sort of cranked out at a much faster rate. But even still, that's insane to think, the 125 of them, and that so many of them turned out to be like all-time classics that we still talk about today, for better or worse. That's very impressive. So I think that's part of the reason I was so taken by it and loved it so much more the second time. But also, I was really taken by how appropriate it feels to watch now in the midst of the year 2020. There's a lot of stuff that actually turns out is still relevant today, 80 years later. Did you find yourself having the same sort of realization?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an 80-year movie, but there's still a lot of relevancy within the plot.
Yeah. Yeah, and speaking of the plot, I say let's just lay sort of the basic groundwork. So the Grapes of Wrath is set in the Great Depression, right in the middle of it. And the first thing that happens is we see Tom Joad, played by the great Henry Fonda, arrives, is just released from prison, and is trying to find his way home, is hitchhiking through the Oklahoma wilderness, and it's we find out very quickly that he had no contact with his family while in prison. And right off the bat, I'm thinking, my goodness, imagine, Adonis, put yourself at that place. You go to prison for what I'm sure was some false accusation, but you go there, you're there for 4 years, and you come back out, like say you went to prison in summer of 2016 and you're released now, and you go around and you see like where is everyone? Like, it's crazy. Is everyone inside or something? Yes. Yes, they are. Like, can you imagine just emerging from 4 years in prison to see the world has completely changed, even more so than 4 years would do under normal circumstances?
I would honestly be very, very shocked, I think, to say the least, if I were to just come out and see the world. Yeah, especially given today. Yeah. I can only imagine what was going on through his head. He must have been, I mean, just the mental whiplash that man went through.
Yeah.
Coming home. I could not imagine it.
Yeah. And he plays it off very well. He hitches a ride with a truck driver. He says, I'm going a few miles over yonder or something like that. And says, eventually it comes up like, so you're going to ask if I was in jail, aren't you? As a matter of fact, I was. I don't know why I'm affecting Jack Nicholson for this, but I'm going to keep going with it. So you're wondering if I was in jail, were you? Well, I was. And you want to know what for? And I love the way Henry Fonda delivers this very specific line. It was for homicide.
Homicide.
Yeah. Like, it's little speech affectations like that are just one little piece of the fun puzzle that is this movie. Fun might not be the right word, but you know what I'm saying. Like the tapestry of the Grapes of Wrath. That's just one extra little square of fabric added to the quilt of the Grapes of Wrath that I dearly love. And so eventually makes his way to where, at the very least, where home was. Runs into like a disgraced priest along the way who just sort of lost the faith. And it's at this point when it really dawns on him that there's been like something happened, something real bad happened. And of course, it's the Great Depression. Of course, it's sort of course, neither of us were alive at the time, but it's really insane how fast things went from such affluence to just a really, the naming is so perfect, to just a Great Depression, this nationwide recession that the entire country went to. And of course, that was very relatable through 2020 eyes. Eventually goes back home, finds it abandoned, and I was sort of confused on this. Somehow just locates his family. Like, they move somewhere else. He just sort of finds them. I forget if they explained that or not. But regardless, he gets there and finds out, like, yeah, this, it's the Dust Bowl. The farmers are being sort of pushed out of their land very forcefully. We see in a flashback sequence, just a farmhouse just get literally bulldozed by this dicky guy who just decides to show up and say, hey, it's part of the job. We're bulldozing farmhouses. What are you going to do? And of course, that is what happened, was because the land was just not producing enough crops, and to the point where farmers weren't really needed as much. And so rather than figure out some sort of, logical way of going about that, they just sort of evicted them forcefully all from their land. And so begins the journey of the Grapes of Wrath, in which the Jodes, this huge family, multiple generations, lots of kids, they all pack up their stuff on this car, which, in looking into the details of the filming and stuff, that car was not meant for huge excursions across the country. And to the point where you're looking at shots of this car just driving across the countryside, and it's just hanging on by a thread. You could tell at any second it could just crumble into scrap metal. And every time they stop, there's steam billowing out of the front of the car, and you're afraid that it's just going to burst into flames. And there's one part where they pull off the shoulder of the road and the car almost tips over. And it's really terrifying to watch. And apparently that was not supposed to happen. So the screams of terror that you hear are genuine in that scene. Oh man. But they make their way across the country because what they have is this little flyer that they've gotten a hold of somehow that says, we're in need of workers in California, or however they say it, to be doing this manual labor. And they say, listen, it's the only lead we have, so we might as well go out there. Now, Adonis, at this point, I want to know, so they're making their way across California. what are your thoughts at this point? Like, is it looking like maybe it's gonna work out okay?
I might just be a tad bit pessimistic, maybe. But at this point, I was going, okay, so I can only expect the worst from here on out.
Yeah.
Because you see a movie like this based off the Great Depression, and you see that they're kind of reaching their goal, which is to get to California. And you're looking at the runtime of the movie and just the general air that the movie is presenting itself with, and you just can't expect things to go too great. It's kind of like, I don't want to like sidetrack too much, but it's sort of the opposite of how I felt when I watched Uncut Gems, because
Okay.
that movie didn't give huge spoilers if you haven't seen Uncut Gems,
Sure.
but there is a part very close to the end of the movie, pretty much the end of the movie, where things look like they're finally looking up for a character, and in just 2 seconds flat.
Oh goodness! Like a nanosecond. It takes all of one frame for everything to go from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows.
Yeah, and that surprised me, because I was like, okay, we have 5 minutes left. Things are looking up. Things are fine. And the directors of that movie just went, oh no, sorry, things aren't gonna go the way you think they are.
Yeah.
So perhaps, and maybe it's because I saw that movie, I watched it just a little before seeing Grapes of Wrath, but my mind just went immediately to, I expect nothing but horrible things for this family. If they're dreaming even a little bit, I expect nightmares to manifest.
This is why
that's where mine was.
This is why we have Adonis Gonzalez on the podcast. Never in a million years would I expect a comparison between Uncut Gems and the Grapes of Wrath. To be clear, these movies are very different tonally, but I think it's
extremely different.
I think it's an interesting comparison, because it's the thing with that movie is that for so much of it, it's just this panic attack. Like at every moment when things might go right, they actually go wrong. And Uncut Gems, The Grapes of Wrath is not necessarily the opposite, but there's never a definitive moment when like all hope is lost. You know what I'm saying? Like even when things sort of take a turn for worse, not the worst, but worse. There's always a little bit of silver lining. Like, well, we could do this instead. There's always this option, which is especially weird considering that relatives die along the way. Like they just sort of die of natural causes. They lose both of their grandparents in the time it takes to drive from Oklahoma to California. And even still, they're like, listen, this is literally the only pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. We got to go there. And they stop at some little encampment along the way, and they run into a guy who's been to California, who's seen the promised land, and says, you're not going to find what you're looking for out there. Believe me. I thought I went out there with the exact same starry look in my eyes, and listen, just think about it logically. So he asks everyone at the encampment, like, you all have this exact same flyer that says they're looking for work. Do you really think you're going to get there before all the available positions are taken? And which makes a lot of sense, because they only need, there's only so much work to go around at a time like this, unfortunately. But they're like, listen, we know it's 1 in a million, but we got to go for it anyway. And indeed they do. And so, one thing I want to draw attention to is just the vast, endless landscape of this movie, especially in those early scenes that are set in Oklahoma, is so specific. And I can think of very few other movies that achieve just such a desolate feeling to the landscape. You really get the sense just everything has sort of crumbled to the ground, and it's just this level, withered, barren land that everyone's in at this point. It really sells the time period well. And you got to remember, the Great Depression is not a distant memory at this time. This is like anyone who's seen this movie, except for like kids who got dragged to the theater for whatever reason, and even still, they remember the Great Depression vividly, and they might even still be reeling from the effects of it. And so I can imagine how powerful this must have been to see, like, wow, that was not long ago. Like, think about the year 2026. You know, there's going to be at least one movie about, like, right now. You know what I'm saying? And it's going to be weird to watch it and be like, yeah, that was the worst, wasn't it? And hopefully by then we'll be better off. Fingers crossed.
Oh, man.
Everything crossed.
The amount of Netflix originals about quarantine I can already see on the horizon.
The Hallmark originals that are like quarantine romance are going to be the most insufferable of all, which is why I plan to watch absolutely none of them. So don't send me a link. Not that anyone's going to send me a link.
I'll send you several links now.
Adonis is going to send me a link to a movie that doesn't exist yet. Gotcha. But yeah, so that is one thing. And I want to thank Adonis. So I'm not the best at remembering plots. So they get to California and remind me exactly. They run into like a police officer, right?
Right.
Like they see. They get to California. They stop at like a gas station or something, and a police officer comes up and says, like, "So where are you folks from?" And they go, "We're from Oklahoma." And he says, "Oh wow!" And it turns out they're from like the same area of the country. And so it says, "Hey, look at that! This guy made it. Maybe we can too." So there's a little glimmer of hope. And then they get to just this horribly depressing, squalid work camp where they're like starving kids.
Funny, really funny. Okay, I'm not going to use the word funny. Really depressing story.
We use that word, and usually what we mean is that it's just sort of an interesting footnote in things. It's not always necessarily humorous, I guess.
It's not like haha funny. It's more like, oh wow funny, you know?
Yeah.
So I can't remember if it was the director or the producer. It was directed by John Ford and it was produced by Daryl F. Zanuck.
Yeah, Zanuck, I believe, was the one who implemented what you're about to describe.
Yeah, I think it was. So Zanuck sent spies.
I was going to say spies.
Way cooler than it actually was. But he sent people to very similar immigrant or migrant campgrounds just to see what it was like on there, you know? And if you've seen The Grapes of Wrath, then you know that these campgrounds are just very depressing to look at. And it definitely strips you of any glimmer of hope you might have had in the previous scene. And it turns out that the conditions were actually way worse than in the book or in the film, and that Steinbeck had actually sugarcoated how terrible they actually were, which is again, if you've seen the movie, is crazy to think about, because I felt pretty depressed seeing it in the movie, so I can only imagine how bad it was in real life. But I definitely remember that scene, and I remember the campgrounds, and that to me is when the movie starts getting in its darkest, because pretty soon after that, like we lose, you know, the preacher, Casey, his name was.
Yeah, that's to think that this was toned down is really depressing to think about. And indeed, it was the Great Depression. So I suppose it's only fitting. And so the conditions are just horrible, and they eventually make their way to another migrant camp, and it's so bad that, like, they get there, they say, we'll pay you this much per hour. And they're like, all right, we'll take what we can get, whatever works. They go into this little shanty that's got like just a giant cobweb disguised as a house is basically what it is. Like that's what they have to live in. And then like moments later, another family shows up of maybe not quite the same size, but at least pretty close to the same size. Another family shows up and they're offered a smaller amount, and they're like, we cannot make a living off of that. What are you talking about? And so just to think that it was that tenuous, the ability of anyone to make a living at any given time or place is really sells the idea well. And it's at this point where I start to get this weird undercurrent from the movie. And Adonis, I'm curious if you thought the same thing. So the plot is about how this family cannot find success out in I guess Oklahoma counts as the Midwest, right?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, but regardless, the middle of the country, they can't find success out there, and the only place they can think to go is, well, let's go to California to find success. Did it start to come off as like a weird show business metaphor to you?
Oh, like 100%. Yeah, absolutely. Especially, I mean, you got to look at the time the movie came out, 1940s. That was arguably like the big boom for Hollywood, right? Like it was around that time where it was really becoming a household name.
Yeah.
And I think it definitely was a metaphor for escaping your reality and going to like the glossy, magical world of Hollywood and getting there and realizing, oh, this isn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. Definitely not advertised correctly, you know.
Yeah, you won't see like a migrant camp on like a stamp of California or anything. It's not what they're going to advertise. They're going to advertise like the hills and the beaches and all the beautiful nature and stuff. But really the honest harsh truth of it all is that there's just so many people there that it's really, and they're not going away. The number's always getting bigger. It's just getting thinner and thinner, the available amount of work. And I don't mean to get really pessimistic or anything, but I do think that is at least, if not like a really super conscious like subtext of this movie, I think it's at least there. And I think it's fascinating that it's something to be found in this story, which is ostensibly very much sort of fixated on one family.
Oh yeah. It also how do I want to say this? It sort of shows you that even though the Joad family is the main family of the movie does a good job of explaining that they're not the only ones who have had this specific situation happen to them. You know, there are other people, even from Oklahoma, who their house has been bulldozed, their life has been uprooted, and they have the exact same idea. So what is the big difference between this family and the Joad family? And there really is none. They're both going for the same thing. But like you said, it's in terms of the Hollywood metaphor, space out there is just getting thinner and thinner and thinner. So even though we are following this family, it doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to turn out right for them.
Yeah. And that moment I mentioned earlier where the family shows up, like if you arrive even seconds later, then if someone else gets there even seconds before you do, that could be it. That could be your shot out the window. And so I think it's interesting to sort of view the movie through that lens. I imagine subsequent viewings from now will only become clearer. But yeah, the story goes apace, and I think it's very interesting what you say, like what differs this family from another, and really nothing. And I think that's actually the universality of it all is actually what kind of makes this story so engaging, is that there's not some huge, like, I don't know how to describe it, but there's not their bloodline is not a huge plot point. Like it just so happens to be focused on this family. So you really could imagine yourself and like your immediate loved ones in this scenario if you wanted to. And
right, yeah.
And I think that makes it very, very powerful that there's not some huge, like, you know, you're the emperor's granddaughter sort of nonsense going on in this thing.
Right. It's not like it would be a very different movie if Tom, say, knew somebody in California, like, oh, I know this guy who can definitely get us, like, because then he's got an advantage over any other character in this movie, right? But they're just a normal family from Oklahoma trying to make it big like everyone else. So I think it definitely helps in terms of like relatability. That is a word. I'm actually not sure anymore.
It is. I assure you, relatability is a word. But yeah, the story keeps going, and eventually what happens is that Tom goes off at night and finds out that there's like this little sort of encampment of like radicals or rebels even, who are sort of getting together. It's essentially like a workers' union, pretty much, like just a much less sophisticated one, like gathering in this tent offsite. And this is where he runs into Preacher Casey again, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And they say like, all right, listen, we gotta figure out to get a better situation for us, because this is it might be working for one of us, but it's not working for all of us. And that's when that's when the cops show up, right, and sort of disrupt everything and say like, hey, you trying to build a better life for yourself, knock that off.
How dare you, cut it out.
Which I'm gonna say right now, another reason that makes it all the more relevant is just how evil the police force is shown to be. That's something that I think we can all connect to nowadays, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's very shocking how relevant it is, and a lot of it. I mean, the big underlying theme for me for the movie is a call for social justice and a call for reform, and so it's crazy to think that 80 years later you can still watch this movie and go, oh wow, yeah, I've seen this situation before last week, and it's like
I've seen this right now. It's crazy, isn't it? Yeah, I think that's definitely very notable. It certainly invites viewing nowadays. So once again, by all means, if you haven't seen this, literally no better time than now. There's a lot of fitting stuff, and I think that's one of the reasons why it makes it all the more powerful when, and we're skipping over stuff, but that we're just sort of generally going over the movie. They eventually leave this horrible migrant camp. They say, listen, we cannot make this work anymore, and they happen upon basically heaven. I was so relieved when they find this other camp that just through sheer good-heartedness and the will to treat everyone well, they arrive at just this little rest stop. That's really fantastic, and the guy there is really nice. And there's this very amusing shot where these two kids of the family, they can't be more than like 7 or 8 years old, they go into like a little bathhouse and they see, what's that shiny looking white thing over there? And they go over and it's a toilet, and they flush it and they're scared and they run away. They've never experienced running water before, and which is of course accurate to the time. It was around that time when that kind of thing was invented, and surely a little farm family from Oklahoma, they would not have access to the luxury of indoor plumbing or anything.
Right.
But yeah, that happens, and they're not going to stay there. Like they're not going to live there or anything, but just to know that there are places where, at least for a little while, everything is fine. That is, I think that really adds a lot to the movie, especially given the trajectory of misery that we've been on this far.
Oh yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Oh gosh, so we're sort of winding down a little bit. Before we talk about the ending, Adonis, I want to say, are there any other things that we sort of skipped over along the way that you wanted to touch on briefly?
Well, no, I think we really nailed it. I mean, I think we hit it. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I might have been a little bit pessimistic going into some parts of this movie, but I do think that the notion that Henry Fonda went to jail for homicide was a little hard for me to get into at first, especially that gleaming smile he's got. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that it's like casting. I don't know. It's like casting. Who's like
casting really... Tom Hanks as Jack the Ripper or something.
Yes. Okay, that's a very good. Like putting Tom Hanks in any role that isn't just the sweetest role you've ever seen.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. But yeah, I think it's a very relevant movie. I definitely think everyone should watch it. It's weird how praised it is, yet not praised at the same time. Like you'll mention it and people go, "Oh yeah, that's a really good movie," but if you like, it's hardly ever mentioned, which is it's one of life's greatest mysteries to me, at least. How ignored this movie is, yet how popular and relevant it is at the same time.
Yeah. Everyone who's seen it loved it. I've not yet met a person who has seen this movie and just thought nothing of it. So I think it's certainly that speaks a lot for it. I believe, if memory serves, and this might have changed since. I believe it has a 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. So that's not easy to get. Only a handful of movies like that. I would not doubt it. Oh, yeah. And it also, again, it was nominated for several Oscars. It's made it onto multiple AFI, American Film Institute lists that they've constructed over the years. That is nothing to bat an eye at, so to speak.
Right.
But yeah, to sort of get to the ultimate conclusion of this movie is they leave this hedonistic camp that they stop at. And again, they're just trying to find work wherever they can. And Henry Fonda decides, I can't just do nothing. I have to make some change. And so, and just takes a vow right then and there. You know what? I'm gonna sort of stick my neck out for whoever needs a neck stuck out for them, so to speak. Like, I'm gonna be the one who's there when someone needs help. And watching that today, again, that was very inspirational to see how just someone have this realization that the world is not going to change unless we decide to really do something about it. And I think, and the movie just ends right there. I think that's a very fascinating thing. Weirdly enough, I found out there was a proposed sequel, which was there was never a book. John Steinbeck never wrote a sequel, nor did any other author, I believe. But the studio said, hey, we want to continue the story. We want to see where it goes. And for whatever reason, they just never went on to it. Weirdly enough, I actually kind of want to see it. I would love to see the many adventures of Tom Joad or whatever, just going out trying to instigate a positive change in the world. But even as it is, I think again it's very inspirational to see this ending of, I don't want to say outright optimism, but sort of this what's the word I'm looking for? Not a call to action, to action even, but just sort of this recognition that, a lot of the world sucks. And like it again, not everyone can do something about it. And that's something that a lot of people just have to deal with. But the ones who can, if they can, that's something very noble. And so I think, again, it's very inspirational, and it's just one of the many incredibly powerful things in this movie that I was blown away with on this second viewing, and I know you're very much in the same boat. Adonis, did you have what was your reaction to that ending? Just basically the same thing as mine?
I definitely saw it as a very inspirational thing, a recognition that things can. A recognition that things are bad, but that maybe things can get a little better if we make a stand, if we make a difference, And I think that was the best thing to do for Tom Joad's character, to sort of have him, not exactly a full 180, but just to sort of give him some purpose and direction. Yeah. And I don't know if I would want a sequel. I think it would be interesting.
The Raspberries of Wrath or something. Just it would just go through the entire spectrum.
Right. Yeah. I don't know, but it would be interesting to see what he was up to afterwards. So I think if it was done right, I wouldn't mind a sequel. I think it's probably 80 years a little late for that, but you know what?
A little bit.
Franchises have started to come back out of nowhere. We're getting another Bill and Ted, which I don't think anyone was expecting, but who knows? Maybe The Grapes of Wrath 2 could come out 80 years after the first one.
I think the moment has passed, but maybe just sort of an abstract sequel. Did you know, for instance, this is a little bit of a tangent, but did you know there was a sequel to Easy Rider in 2012, and it's one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life, because it's incredibly cheap, and I forget the exact details, but it was made by someone who just so happened to have the rights to Easy Rider for whatever reason. It might have been a relative of someone who worked on the movie or something, or just who came into this inheritance of the rights of this movie. But they're just screwing around for an hour and a half using the names and stock footage from Easy Rider. So that's not the way to go. And by the way, not recommending that movie by any stretch. It's there's bad, and then there's Easy Rider: The Ride Back, which is next level, just nonsensical indulgence of the worst kind. So if it's anything like that, stay far away.
The title itself just bodes ill will. I won't be watching that.
I never thought I'd see the day where I brought up The Grapes of Wrath and Easy Rider: The Ride Back in the same conversation. But you know what? That's why we do the Extra Milestone. Adonis, I think that's just about everything we have on the Grapes of Wrath. And if you remember anything else later, by all means, feel free to bring it up. But for now, let's move on to something really, really different from the Grapes of Wrath.
Woohoo!
We're going to talk about, and this is an unusual one, because when I said, Adonis, I would love to have you on this podcast, I sent you this big, long list of everything celebrating an anniversary in the month of March, again, a few months back at this point, but we're slowly catching up. I sent you a list, and I said, which ones of these would you be interested in talking about? And you said some of the obvious ones, the Grapes of Wrath, of course, and How to Train Your Dragon we'll get to. But the other one that you were the only one who even remotely expressed interest in, Terror of MechaGodzilla. Adonis, explain yourself.
Oh, okay. If the jury is listening, I will plead my case.
It is.
The reason I was so interested in this is because I have seen... I'm trying to think. I think I've seen maybe one Godzilla film that wasn't the 2014 reboot or its sequel. And for the longest time, I was always curious about why these movies were so revered. I mean, there's
revered is a strong word, but yeah.
Well, why they're so talked about, why there's such because there are very huge followings, especially in Japan. I mean, Gojira, as he's called there, is huge. Kaijū movies are huge, and I'm not just talking about kaijus themselves. And so I really wanted to see. I mean, there's 15 movies in this franchise. 15.
Oh goodness. That's just the first wave of Godzilla. There are actually, depending on how you count, there's somewhere between like 36 and 39 Godzilla movies. Oh. And I've seen every single one of them. Because last year, I decided at the beginning of the year 2019 that by the time Godzilla King of the Monsters came out, I wanted to have seen every single Godzilla movie. And listen, it was not easy to do for a variety of reasons. I remember the day I saw Godzilla King of the Monsters, I had still not seen all of them. I was watching them as fast as I possibly could, like in parking lots, at drive-thrus, inside of restaurants and stuff. Like if there was a connection, let's get another 5 minutes into this Godzilla movie. It was intense. And then but I got there, by God, that night when I saw Godzilla King of the Monsters with John Negroni. Some of you might remember I reviewed that movie live at John's house, which was just one of the defining experiences of my life. I did it, goddammit, and I will never pass up an opportunity to get to vaunt my semi expertise. Because I say semi because there are others who have seen these movies many more times than I have and are more intimately familiar, but I have seen them all, and I think I take great pride in that. And I was especially excited to talk about Terror of MechaGodzilla because that just happens to be one of my favorites.
Man has constructed a technological terror so extreme, nothing can stand before it. Witness the Terror of MechaGodzilla. Can Godzilla prevail against his mechanical clone?
Now, Adonis, real fast, before I move on any further, you watched Terror of MechaGodzilla, having only seen one other non-American Godzilla movie. What did you make of this movie? Tell the listeners.
Well, first off, I was not expecting there to be existing plot. My interpretation, that's not the word. My thoughts on the Godzilla movies, what I thought they were 30 to 40 random Godzilla. It seemed like Monster of the Week, but in movie form. I thought maybe, Godzilla's just going to fight somebody and then that's it.
Yeah.
I was not expecting this to be a direct sequel to a previous MechaGodzilla.
Yes.
But I caught on pretty quick. MechaGodzilla attacked the town. Godzilla stopped him. Still iffy on whether or not Godzilla's the bad guy, because I kind of feel like he's just minding his business, right? And it just kind of seems like the humans are always like poking and prodding, and then they go and make a robotic version of him.
Yeah.
I was not expecting there to be an alien subplot. There was a lot I was not expecting in this movie, and I think that's why I enjoyed it so much, is that it just blew my expectations out of the water.
Yes.
I was
Very
expecting
fitting.
to just see 2 hours of corny but admittedly fun to watch fighting. And the movie started off like that. It starts with a bit of a recap, I'm assuming, of Godzilla fighting MechaGodzilla, and Godzilla just absolutely... the new Godzilla is terrifying, right? I love new Godzilla, the American Godzilla. I mean, I love how he looks. I love the audio quality. I love his blue laser breath. But old Godzilla is just on another level. He gets into a fighting stance, and like he has this hype roar that he gets into that I can only imagine is just for himself. It's him going, "All right, you can do this, G." I imagine Godzilla calls himself G.
Yes.
Sorry, I just completely lost my train of thought.
It's okay. As the makers of these Godzilla movies tend to do as well sometimes. You are forgiven.
Yeah, but that was my experience going into this movie. I went, okay, it's exactly what I was expecting it to be, and then immediately just went as left field as you could possibly go. And I was really invested in it. I was invested in the human characters, the aliens, even Godzilla himself. It's nowhere near a perfect movie, but it's a very, very interesting subgenre of film that I had never seen before, and so I definitely want to go back and watch the rest of them if they're anything like this, because it's very different.
Everything you just said is utterly fascinating to me. I think it's occurring to me now that this must be one of the weirdest ones to start on, because actually, to answer your question, Terror of MechaGodzilla is not like other Godzilla movies. So, Adonis, if I may. I want to talk a little bit about the history of Godzilla, because when else am I going to get to do that? So it was the first movie, Gojira, was a very serious, very somber movie. It was, of course, sort of a reaction to, yes, the nuclear bomb, but also just sort of the notion of nuclear warfare in the first place. And as a result, it's a very, very downtrodden movie, the original, I should say. And also happens to be really fantastic. And to this day, I still believe that the 1954 original, directed as well by Ishirō Honda, is still the greatest of all Godzilla movies. And then the very next year, Godzilla Raids Again came out. Now I'm not going to necessarily give away what happens at the end of the first Godzilla movie, but this is what I will say. The Godzilla that shows up in Godzilla Raids Again is not the same monster that we see in the original. If memory serves, the costume is somewhat different, and it's just a completely other member of the same species, and it's that second member of the species that we follow for the next 14 movies. Now, the interesting thing that happens is that in that second movie, Godzilla Raids Again, Godzilla is still the villain. In that one, he fights a dinosaur called Anguirus, which is like this big sort of dinosaur, kind of ankylosaurus kind of thing. And they're both the villains. Like it's like Alien versus Predator. Whoever wins, we lose. Like they want both of them to die, pretty much.
Right.
Because they're both these huge forces of nature, like threatening all of human civilization as we know it. So that movie happened, and it was a weird departure because it was a lot campier than the first one. In the first one, it was just Godzilla. There was no second monster to face off against. And in the second one, when they introduced a second one, it became more like a fight movie and less of of a real comment on anything. It's almost in a really cynical way. You could look at it on just sort of one of those cash-in sequels made really quickly after the original, just after something hits a sudden surge in popularity. And indeed, it was from a different director. Ishirō Honda did not direct Godzilla Raids Again. And so it's easy to see how that may very well be the case. And then, interesting thing is that Godzilla did not have another movie for 7 years. It wasn't until a random resurgence in the popularity of King Kong in Japan that Godzilla got a third movie. If it weren't for King Kong, we may never have had a Godzilla franchise. It might have just sort of died on the vine right there. But King Kong, for whatever reason, just got really popular in the early 60s, and they thought, hey, let's face King Kong off against Godzilla. And indeed, King Kong wins, which always baffles everyone that King Kong wins in that original movie, considering that it's a Japanese movie and that the American monster wins the fight at the end, which is absolute nonsense, by the way, because the way that King Kong wins is that they have a fight underwater. They both like tumble off a cliff, wrestling each other. They go underwater, and then only King Kong comes back up and swims away. Like, as if it wasn't stupid enough that Godzilla doesn't win that fight immediately. It's in Godzilla's territory. And so that always kind of drove me nuts.
It was on his home court, and he still lost.
Exactly. Their theories have been posited that I guess they just had a chat underwater over the span of 10 seconds and just said, this is stupid. What are we doing? And Godzilla just stayed underwater, but it just looks like King Kong won. We'll never know. But regardless. Yeah. And that one, and King Kong versus Godzilla, that was the first one in color. And so it actually, any real sense of like seriousness or somberness or anything was all but gone away. And so, and I think, and there is still like drama in it. Like I actually, for all the just weird nonsense in it, I actually like King Kong versus Godzilla quite a bit, because I think the build-up in that movie is especially good. And so I hope they're able to capture at least a little bit of that in the upcoming remake of that. But that is for another time. But from there, it spun off into what is very much known as or perceived as the heyday of Godzilla. It's what these first 15 movies are what's called the Shōwa era. And from King Kong versus Godzilla on, it was very much what you're describing, just sort of this episodic monster or perhaps even monsters of the week kind of thing. There was very little continuity. One movie in particular always baffles me. The way it starts is that for whatever reason, Godzilla at the beginning of the movie is just encased in a mountain at the beginning, and they have to awaken Godzilla with lightning to fight a giant lobster monster. And the movie before that did not end with Godzilla getting buried in an avalanche or something. So how he got in that mountain, we may never know. But it's just one of those things where Godzilla just sort of a part of life, as are the rest of these giant monsters. And they had recurring characters like King Ghidorah and Mothra and Rodan, all the classics.
So
yeah.
So I have to ask. I did a little bit of research after watching Terror of MechaGodzilla, just so we could talk about like the franchise. Did you ever watch any of the other like kaiju movies? Because I didn't know. My experience with Godzilla has just been seeing the new movie, seeing Terror of MechaGodzilla, and seeing was it Michael J. Fox? I think it was, right? He was in that one. The
Michael
the
J. Fox
movie.
You're talking about the American with Godzilla with Matthew Broderick in it?
Matthew Broderick, yes, thank you.
Gosh. That movie sent shivers down my spine. It's terrible.
Look at all these fish.
That's a lot of fish.
That's what
Classic.
It was. And I played a couple of the video games. Like I said, I had seen one of the original Toho production movies, but I can't remember which one. But I didn't know that a few of the monsters that Godzilla faces have their own movies.
Oh, yes.
Like Mothra apparently has a trilogy of movies. And so I wanted to ask you if you ever saw them or if you were ever planning on watching these sort of, not spin-offs, but these other kaiju films within the Godzilla universe.
I was very thorough in my Godzilla watch through, and yes, I have. And it's actually, and they're not even spin-offs because they were, Rodan and Mothra specifically were introduced in other movies before they showed up in Godzilla movies. They were their own thing. The movie Rodan, I actually really love, and it's one of my favorite kaiju movies. The Mothra solo movie is not especially great, but it's fun for what it is and is a good introduction to the character. The Mothra trilogy is not worth your time whatsoever, so I do not recommend that. That was from the late 90s. That I found very little of worth there. It's made for kids, so it's very just barely has an idea in its head, and it shows. That one you can skip very easily, but Mothra the solo movie I do recommend checking out. Just if nothing else, just to get a full bore exposition load of what Mothra the character is all about. That is a useful thing. But yeah, all these monsters started showing up, and they started becoming very popular in America as well as Japan. And one very funny piece of trivia that I always love to think about is in, I believe, the third to last movie of the Shōwa era. These first 15 Godzilla movies was called Godzilla versus Megalon, and Megalon's like this big undersea cockroach thing. And on the American poster, from 1976, I believe, a couple of years after it was released in Japan, it's Godzilla and Megalon, the giant beetle, each standing on one of the former World Trade Towers. That's not in the movie. They just made that up and threw it on the poster because they thought it would sell a few extra tickets to trick someone into thinking that there was going to be an epic fight scene on top of the World Trade Towers. Alas, that did not happen. Although it did happen that very same year in the King Kong remake from 1976, which is also quite bad. I also don't recommend that one. But King Kong, the climactic action sequence does take place on the World Trade Towers. But to sort of catch up to Terror of MechaGodzilla, where we are now, it sort of peaked in like the early 70s, the sort of super uber population of Godzilla. And so the franchise was kind of winding down. They had already planned to end it in the late 60s with a movie called Destroy All Monsters, which is quite good. And then that one was immediately followed by All Monsters Attacked, which is the worst Godzilla movie, hands down. Even worse than the Matthew Broderick one. Not by a lot, I grant you, but still quite bad. So that one is also not worth your time. I have detailed reviews of every one of these on my Letterboxd account, by the way. But yeah, it was sort of winding down, and so they introduced MechaGodzilla, this big giant robot version of Godzilla. And the funny thing, you mentioned that humans built MechaGodzilla. Nope, MechaGodzilla is an alien, showed up from outer space, built by aliens, and was originally disguised as the actual Godzilla, who by this point had sort of become the hero in a weird sort of like 180 from the original, how Godzilla was the villain in the original and the first couple. MechaGodzilla showed up with like this fake Godzilla tissue that melted off, and someone saw like metal underneath and said, "Wait a minute, that's not Godzilla, that's a MechaGodzilla." Roll credits. Like that's basically the way it works out. And eventually Godzilla defeated MechaGodzilla. You know, Bob's your uncle. It worked out. So by the time we get to Terror of MechaGodzilla, Godzilla is sort of has already become the worldwide icon that he is now, and to the point where, as I was marathoning all of these last year, I got to this one, and I was sort of worn down a little bit. I don't know if anyone out there listening has marathoned all of these in the span of a couple of months. You can tell they did not pour every ounce of their heart and soul into every one of these movies. They were from 1962 until 1975. They were cranked out on a very consistent basis. They were, with the exception of 1970, there was one a year. And that was made up for by the fact that in 1964 there were 2 of them. So they really cranked these things out, and you can tell because they don't always. They're not all classics. I think there are a few of them in that era, especially, that really stand out in my memory. And Terror of MechaGodzilla is one of them, because we get to this movie and we have like these, like they're trying to dig up the remnants of MechaGodzilla, and they accidentally awaken the Titanosaurus, which I found out is just like this big goofy looking red dinosaur, which is apparently it was originally going to be 2 dinosaurs, but they sort of combined them into one just to save time and money, apparently, or just willpower or whatever. And they awaken Titanosaurus, they awaken MechaGodzilla. They're like, oh gosh, what are we going to do? They're teaming up, they're attacking, everything is doomed. And these are not long movies, keep that in mind. But it's like, what? Is it 80 minutes long? You watched it more recently than I did. It's something like that, right?
Something about, yeah, it's not too long.
Yeah, these movies had very few illusions about the portent that they were carrying. So they were usually pretty short. But it's looking pretty hopeless. And it's at this point, it's about 40 minutes in, I'm realizing Godzilla hasn't shown up yet. It's almost like it's almost they've briefly mentioned Godzilla in passing once before, but that was about it. And then they're attacking the city. They're trying to evacuate as many people as we can. And then in one of my favorite moments in quite possibly all of cinema, it's panning along the horizon. We've established that Godzilla wants nothing to do with us. He kind of hates humanity by this point in the series. We're doomed. And then it's panning across the skyline, and we see rise up from behind a building the silhouette of Godzilla's head. And I am not kidding when I tell you that when I first watched this last year in like April or whatever it was, I think I cried literal tears of joy when it cuts to the Titanosaurus just get blasted with this beam of fire, and then it cuts back to the silhouette of Godzilla, closes up on his face, and they made the puppet glare. Like, that's how much they cared. They wanted to show us that Godzilla is always here for us and will save the day, even if it's at the last second. And then the Godzilla theme starts playing, and it's just a photo finish from there. Like neither the Titanosaurus or MechaGodzilla have a chance. And what ensues is this cool fight that I remember very few details of, but that just the high of that intro was all I really needed.
I remember watching the fight and just thinking it was really, really cool that that MechaGodzilla almost steps back a bit just to see, like, because he's doing it just so that he can strike when Godzilla gets tired. And I thought that was such an interesting thing to do, because you would expect them to just like it's to be like this 3-way fight between these huge monsters, but like there's a little bit of strategy in there, and I thought that definitely raised the stakes a bit when I was watching it. Yeah,
it's a huge fight where, like, the day is saved, but we're gonna have to we gotta punch some dinosaurs and some robots first, and so it all goes down, and meanwhile we're following these human characters that have. They have a vague plot line. I could not tell you what their deal is, to save my life. Adonis, what is the deal with these human characters? Because as we all know, human characters not always the strength of a Godzilla movie.
No, definitely not always. They were interesting, but I really enjoyed the so pretty much there's this one character who works for this team of scientists who I believe are trying to understand Godzilla or capture him or something, and they're also worried that MechaGodzilla is going to return. All the while, one of their submarines is attacked by a Titanosaurus. So now there's an even bigger problem to worry about. So they task this one scientist with investigating the research of this older scientist who was ridiculed for his theories on talking to animals or controlling animals, something like that. And he goes to the estate, and he asks this scientist's daughter if he could speak to him, and she's like, "Oh, well, he passed away a few years ago," which we very soon after find out is a lie. And so there's this romantic subplot between the head scientist and the daughter of the older scientist, who is also still alive.
Yes.
And
the
working,
romantic subplot.
Yes.
Never far from a Godzilla movie.
Never. And the older scientist is working with the aliens, who I didn't realize were aliens at first because they don't look like aliens. They look like normal people.
Yeah, that's the funny thing about Godzilla aliens, especially in these early movies. They're just humans in shiny silver suits.
Yes, in just shiny suits. And the aliens recreate MechaGodzilla, which I didn't catch until you mentioned. I thought that they were just here to invade the Earth, and they saw MechaGodzilla, and they were like, "Oh, we could use that." But I guess they were the original creators of Mecha. I didn't realize he was an alien.
Yes.
And
this is what awaits you if you dive into the Godzilla filmography, Adonis.
I think I'm going to, because, like I said, this is a very interesting and unique movie experience for me. Yeah.
And I think part of the reason why I love this one especially so much is because of how into it I had gotten this far. Like, this is 14 movies plus all those other, side movies, Mothra and Rodan and a few others that are sort of tangentially connected.
Right.
I got really into this world. And so to see it get sent off, especially like knowing that this was the last one of this Shōwa era, of this first era, that is really sort of, that's really classified more than anything by just the campy monsterness of it all.
Right.
Like other eras have sort of gone out of their way to distinguish themselves in other ways. Like the Heisei era, which came directly after this, or not directly, but was the second era of Godzilla. That one was more about sort of repurposing the characters that had already been introduced, trying to make them a little bit more dramatic, more effective, trying to tell a longer story over multiple installments. And I say to great effect. As a matter of fact, the Heisei era is actually my favorite era of Godzilla. And then after that, they had the Millennium era, which was a little bit more of a serialized thing, where each one did not connect to, like, none of them connected to each other, with the exception of like one 2-parter, I think. But they were all meant to sort of stand on their own. And that was sort of what set that one apart. And of course, now we have the Monsterverse, which is all about sort of telling this interconnected universe that's taken place over decades, if not centuries of time,
right? And
getting all the monsters involved in everything. This one was just sort of about, hey, what monster costume can we make this time? And that's kind of as far as it went. And it worked out nicely for what it was on multiple occasions. I think Invasion of Astro Monster is one of my favorites. Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, is another good one. Destroy All Monsters is fine. I think Son of Godzilla is terrible. I think All Monsters Attack is terrible. So it ran hot and cold this first era, but by the time you get to the end of it, if you watch them all in order like I do, and you just see that head pop up over the horizon, I cannot describe the joy I felt. And I showed that scene out of context to a few of my friends, and even they said they got chills. So like, whoa, this is some powerful stuff. And then Godzilla just defeats the monsters handily and then walks back into the ocean. It's this beautiful sunset and the credits roll. And it's like, yes, that is mother effing Godzilla in a nutshell right there. Like that, this is kind of where this vision of Godzilla as a badass, I feel like this is where it kind of comes from. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like this is where it all begins. To hear that you had such a positive reaction, even without all the grandfathered in affection for it, that's very meaningful to me. I think we've gone on a long time about Godzilla, but Adonis, I just want to ask: is there anything else of note that you wanted to bring up about Terror of MechaGodzilla, besides obviously the inclination to want to dive further into the world of Godzilla?
I just want to say I really feel like people should leave Godzilla alone just a bit. It kind of seems, from what I've experienced with this movie and the newer movies, it kind of seems like he's just trying to relax underwater. I don't know if he's got maybe an apartment under there, and he's it always seems like he's just about to sit down.
We found out that Godzilla lives in Atlantis in the newest one, so I think
right.
Maybe Godzilla just wants to chill in Atlantis with all the corpses of Atlanteans from generations past.
Maybe he's got a show that he's watching, and he's just about to press play, and every time he does, he hears that guttural scream and just the sound of burning buildings, and he's just like, well, here we go again.
It's like The Incredibles. It's like, I just cleaned up this mess. Can we keep it clean for 10 minutes? Every time.
And that's another thing too. You mentioned that they had the Godzilla puppet glare. I really love the emotion they give Godzilla, because you can definitely, just in this movie alone, I could definitely see when he was just absolutely fed up with MechaGodzilla.
Yes.
When that movie started and they were fighting, and I think he knocked MechaGodzilla knocked Godzilla away from him, and he just went flying in a very funny scene that kind of just seemed like they had lost control of the puppet and the wind was taking it to wherever. And he gets back up and he just lets out a roar, which I translated as, "Are you serious?"
Yeah. Like, really? That's the move you're going to try?
Come on.
Yeah.
How many monsters have I destroyed? Come on, MechaGodzilla.
Quite a few by this point. So I think it's fair to say that Godzilla had some practice, whereas MechaGodzilla,
for sure.
Godzilla's a veteran at all times. You always just get that sense that Godzilla's just never wants to be there, but knows that he sort of has to. Like, listen. It's almost like Mission Impossible Fallout, where they have that realization, like, listen, no one but us is going to save the world, and it's going to be the most difficult thing we've ever done, but we have to do it because no one else will. Fascinating stuff. I really dig this movie. It's one of my very favorite Godzilla movies. Not because of the plot. I don't care about the plot. I don't care about what the scientists tried to figure out, what is MechaGodzilla? No, it's because this movie, more than possibly any other Godzilla movie, even the 2014 one, which I actually really love. That's probably my second favorite Godzilla movie. But even more so than that, it just understands the essence of how the world views Godzilla, even if it's not necessarily the same as how the character was first conceived. So I think it's one of the very best for that reasons, and I'm glad that you liked it. So I can't wait to hear your reactions to the rest of this glorious hot and cold series of movies that we have here with Godzilla. And and I look forward to the inevitable podcast where we review every Godzilla movie one at a time. That'll be a lot of fun.
Cannot wait.
Yeah, we might actually do that. Who knows? But yeah, Adonis, we have one more movie to talk about, and I suspect we won't spend nearly as much time on this one. But it is worthwhile nonetheless. If you listen, you of course know that we are talking about I think it's fair to say it's a classic at this point. DreamWorks' How to Train Your Dragon.
Welcome to Dragon Training. Today you will learn to fight dragons.
Pain. Love it.
Let's get started.
You should come by sometime to work out. You look like you work out. I guess it's just you and me, huh?
No, just you.
Huh?
Focus, Hiccup!
Can I transfer to the class with the cool Vikings? Whoa. Has anyone ever tried to train a dragon?
No one's ever lived to tell the tale.
It's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you. Let's see if this works. We're gonna take this nice and slow. Come on, buddy. Come on, buddy. Whoa! Yeah!
Get down!
It's okay. You just scared him.
I scared him?
Everything we know about them is wrong. Let me show you.
Which is a movie that came out 10 years ago now, which is crazy to think about. And I have a story about first seeing this. But Adonis, I want to ask you, we're roughly the same age, right? You're like a year or two older than me, so we probably had very similar experiences seeing this for the first time. How did you first come to How to Train Your Dragon way back in the far off year of 2010?
Oh, all right. Well, let me paint the picture just a little bit. Let me paint the scene. It's 2010. A young 12-year-old Adonis is going to see the movies every Friday night with his father. You know, the typical Friday movie night. There's not a lot out at this point.
It's March of 2010. What are you going to expect?
Right. You know, there's probably your average January to March horror movie that's out.
So you know what? I'm going to look up what was out in March of 2010. You keep talking and I'll figure it out.
Okay. So we're going to the movies and we're deciding what we're going to watch. You know, there's nothing out that really catches our eye, except for one poster, because I hadn't seen the trailer. So all I saw was the poster for this new movie from Dreamworks called How to Train Your Dragon. And it was that little Dreamworks, that very tiny Dreamworks, right above the huge red bolded Dragon 3D that that caught my attention. And I was like, Dad, we have to see this movie. We have no idea what it's about, but it's got, you know, everything I love. It's got DreamWorks. They made Shrek and Kung Fu Panda. So at this point, I was very much a DreamWorks fanboy. It's got dragons. What little kid doesn't like dragons? And from what I can see, it's very educational. So that one's for you, Dad. You know, take me to see this movie, and I might just learn something out of it.
We have this dragon, and we're trying to train it, but we don't know how to. All we can do is go up, hey, shh, shh. Why do people always do that? Why do they shush animals? Sorry, weird John Mulaney tangent. Okay, Adonis, I'm gonna stop you right there. Let me tell you what else was playing in March of 2010 at the Cineplexes of the time. March 5th, we had Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland.
Oh wow,
remember that?
I do.
Yeah. So that was the thing. Actually. That made a ton of money, but interesting. I actually haven't seen it, so who knows? And then let's see. We had Paul Greengrass's Green Zone. I've never even heard of this. I have no idea what it is.
No idea what that is either.
Then we have She's Out of My League, which I imagine was probably a little out of your 12-year-old league, so to speak.
For sure.
Yes, and then the week before How to Train Your Dragon, get this, Diary of a Wimpy Kid.
Oh!
Remember that?
I do.
Those were the days, were they?
To think those came out in the same month, just a week apart from each other.
Just a week apart. And the same day as How to Train Your Dragon, Hot Tub Time Machine came out. Again, I'm going to assume that was not in the rotation, not in the 12-year-old Adonis rotation.
That was, I'm not going to lie, that was probably the movie my dad was hoping to see. But unfortunately, I can't imagine he would have allowed me to see it with him. But so we saw How to Train Your Dragon in theaters opening week, and to this day, it is not only my favorite DreamWorks movie, one of my favorite animated movies of all time. It was unexpected. It wasn't something I had ever experienced before in an animated movie, because it is an animated comedy, animated family action adventure comedy, but it's very grounded in reality, and I think that's why it has lasted so long. At least in my opinion. Yeah, that's fascinating. I think you make a lot of interesting points. I saw How to Train Your Dragon the first time on a field trip for school. I think it was 2010, so I would have been in 5th grade, and that was our reward for everyone who did well in school. Is we'd walk down to the movie theater, which was within walking distance of my elementary school, and just see whatever animated movie happened to be playing. And we were lucky enough to have the pleasure of getting to see How to Train Your Dragon. Now, weirdly enough, I don't remember reacting especially vitriolically when I first saw it. It wasn't until last year, in fact, when How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World came out,
And I had never seen the second one, and it had been almost a decade since I'd seen the first one. I decided to rewatch all three of them, or rather watch all three of them. And I knew the legacy it had, but I had just never gone back to see it with fresh eyes. And so going back to see it again, I was like, oh, so this is fantastic. Everyone was right. I was amazed by it. It was so, it's such an immersive world that it creates.
Yeah.
And I think, and especially, and this is the main thing that I took away from it. It's, for those of you who have seen like a photograph of me or something, you'll know I'm not the most muscular man there is. Adonis, I'm sure you know this. I'm actually rather lean and rather tall. I'm 6'5" and do not have a whole lot of muscle or anything. But seeing that Hiccup, the main character in this movie, voiced by Jay Baruchel, that's kind of the arc he goes on, is that all these Viking youth are like really big and burly and strong, and his dad is voiced by Gerard Butler, which I can imagine would just be the most intimidating thing ever, to look like Hiccup and have a dad like that. Which, by the way, it's always weirded me out that the adult Vikings are Scottish and all the kids are American. Like, it's just so strange.
Oh, I never.
The inconsistency of the accent. You got Gerard Butler and Craig Ferguson voicing the two main adult characters, arguably the two most Scottish men on the planet. And then you have like Jay Baruchel and America Ferrera voicing the the main child characters. It's just a weird detail. It's vaguely distracting, but you get over it pretty quick. Regardless, seeing Hiccup sort of have to go on this journey to prove himself, that physical strength is not very often, at the very least, not always sort of the defining factor of a man. And I think I'm actually kind of amazed that I didn't take more away from that as a young 11-year-old who it seemed like the kind of thing I could have used, or maybe a little further down the line from there. But regardless, it was really powerful to see that, and I really latched onto that, in addition to just how gorgeous it looks. Like, this movie is 10 years old, which is crazy to think about. It's 10 years old, and it still looks fantastic. It's still, obviously, the sequels, the animation improved a little bit, but you could still watch this now, and you will not be distracted by how aged the effects are. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so that movie, it's, for that reason, I actually don't have a whole lot more to say about How to Train Your Dragon, except to say that it just goes to show how much heart and soul went into this movie, more than pretty much any other DreamWorks movie. They have other good ones, but I'm looking through the list now. I'm not seeing anything that really competes with How to Train Your Dragon when it comes to DreamWorks productions. Of course, the Shrek movies and various others have made a stamp of their own, but this is the one that I think really showed what the studio can do. And so I think it's well revered for good reason to this day. So sure. I really dig How to Train Your Dragon.
I agree. I wanted to lay a little trivia down that I learned about revisiting this movie.
Yeah. So
firstly, it was directed by I'm going to butcher one of these names. Directed by Chris Sanders and Dean DeBlois.
Yeah, Dean DeBlois, or DeBlois, I think. DeBlois. Let me look that up.
Directed by this duo. They had previously directed Lilo and Stitch, which is one of my favorite Disney movies of all time. Just a lot of great memories growing up with that one. I've seen it countless times. And they actually... So How to Train Your Dragon is based off a book series. I've never read them, but they made a few... they took a few liberties making the movie. They made a few notable changes. And one of the big changes is the relationship between the humans and the dragons. In the book, they're already at that point where dragons are sort of companions to humans, kind of a cowboy and horse type of relationship. In the movie, though, it doesn't start off like that. In the movie, they're rivals, and there's this war going on between dragons and Vikings they capture dragons and have them for like these arena matches and stuff, but it's not like it's not a mutual existence sort of thing just yet. And they started it off like that because they wanted to they really wanted to they wanted to show how powerful, they wanted to make an impact with the story, and they wanted to get to that point where the dragons and the humans work together, and they wanted to show the journey. And they chose Hiccup and Toothless and made changes to them. Like, Hiccup is significantly I mean, even in the book, he's a very scrawny, weak character, but they really play that into the movie, and they changed Toothless entirely. Toothless in the book is a small dragon that's very salamander-like and actually fits on Hiccup's shoulders, and so he doesn't ride him because he's way too small. But they changed Toothless to a Night Fury in the movie because they just felt that was the complete polar opposite of what they were trying to go for with Hiccup. And so they chose the weakest, scrawniest character in the movie and paired him up with a dragon that could potentially end his life in like seconds if he
could swallow him whole,
right?
Probably.
Yeah, if he wanted to. And I always thought that was interesting, like a very interesting storytelling choice, because it works. Like, you definitely see the contrasting main characters, and it definitely plays into the story of the first movie and the franchise as a whole. So yeah, I just thought that was a very interesting little director's note that I wanted to mention.
Yeah, that is interesting. I vaguely remember hearing about this source material that evidently is more of a loose inspiration than like an actual basis for the story.
Right.
But yeah, it is interesting how they sort of take that tack of, we have not yet achieved harmony in nature with these creatures, sort of showing how it got there. And then what I love about the sequels is that it's not just like, okay, we've made friends with the dragons and now something else happens the next day. Like, it actually takes place kind of in real time, really. It was the 3 How to Train Your Dragon movies. They were released over the span of the 2010s, and we see the characters age and sort of encounter new challenges that don't just seem like perfunctory, oh, we're making something up because we got to make a sequel. These are actually things that would arise naturally if such a fantastical world were to exist. So I think the whole trilogy is really an accomplishment in that way. But it all started with the first one, and I think without the strong basis, this world building that we have in the first one, and just the palpable passion, like it's just coming out of the screen with the first one especially. It's really clear that they made something really special. So I'm glad that we agree on that, and we know that most of you listening out there have probably seen it and most likely love it as much as we do, if not more. So we won't go on too long about it. But I just do think it's fascinating that movie is 10 years old now. Like, how crazy is that to think that was a decade ago?
Right.
I can still remember so vividly the nachos I got at the movie theater, and now here I am, a surly, decrepit 21-year-old man.
Decrepit?
Yes.
Very, very interesting choice of words.
I am nothing if not a proponent of colorful syntax. So, oh gosh. Anyway, Adonis, I think that is just about everything we have for this episode of the Extra Milestone. I had a ton of fun talking about these movies with you. I hope that we get to do it again sometime.
Absolutely, anytime, man.
Yeah. So, for anyone who has been listening to this sort of expansion of the Extra Milestone so far, thank you very much. Of course, again, we don't know when this is going to come out, so I don't actually know what to tease for next week. But suffice it to say, it's going to be another exciting trip into the past, perhaps multiple points in the past, and I look forward to each and every one of them. Again, thank you, Adonis, for joining me. I know it was sort of technologically difficult to pull this together, but we did it, by God, and I'm glad that we did.
Absolutely, I agree, man.
Yeah. So I think that is just about all we got. So we are going to sign off as we always do from the internet, Colorado. I'm Sam Noland.
From the World Wide Web, Arizona, I'm Adonis Gonzalez.
And we'll see you on the Extra Milestone.